Miñeros ya terminó, Antonio también. Decisiones graves. Sí, he visto una. ¿Esta?
Venta.
Ya salió uno.
Ahí es el Texas ayer. Texas ayer. O sea, 12 años ya, 10 minutos. Ya no citas. ¿Le puedes ir a Alejandra? Sí, cámara de ella.
Tú sabes,
Bueno, recibimos ahora a nuestro siguiente ponente, originario de Texas, IBBA, que es máster en Ciencias, Ciencia Animal y Ciencia de la Carne por la Universidad de Texas, de la AMM. Cuenta con más de 7 años en el sector agropecuario. Actualmente es director de Servicios de Campo y Proyectos Estratégicos en la International Brangus Association. Recibamos con un fuerte aplauso a Mr. Caldwell, director de Servicios de Campo y Proyectos Estratégicos.
All right, thank you. I appreciate the introduction. First, before I get started, I would extend a very heartfelt thank you from myself as well as from the rest of our group here for just the overwhelming hospitality that we've received thus far as visitors in Peru. All of us, this is our first time in this country. Cannot thank you enough for the overwhelming hospitality that you've given us. We've had a really great time. I really learned a lot about the growing and blossoming beef industry here in Peru, and a lot of the opportunities that are out there as well. So some of the things that I'm going to be talking about today, obviously we can all read the slide here, or maybe you can't because it's in English and it's not translated. But innovation and sustainability in Brangus breeding, the future of the Brangus breed in global livestock farming. So some of the ways that Brangus kind of fits into all of this here. So just a little bit about me. Had a really good introduction already, but grew up on a commercial cow-calf operation in Central Texas. Very heavily utilized Brangus and ultra black genetics all throughout my upbringing there. Attended Texas Tech and Texas A&M universities and studied meat science. So my academic background, my professional background, until I came to the International Brangus Breeders Association, dealt with large commercial beef packing, large commercial beef processing. It's where I draw a lot of my background from. And I know this from personal experience, and I know we've heard a lot about it this week already, and these are some of the things that we already know about Brangus cattle, right? So some of the things that they do well, probably better than any other breed. Brangus are consistently a source of retained, what I call retained or persistent heterosis. Okay? So if we stack Brangus breeding on top of each other, generation after generation after generation, you're going to still get a fair amount of heterosis and hybrid vigor from these types of cattle, comparative to other breeds like just breeding Angus or Hereford or Simmental on top of one another again and again and again. You're going to be able to see that hybrid vigor and that heterosis stick around quite a bit longer. These cattle, because of, again, heterosis, which is the only free one in the cattle business, because of that heterosis, we see these cattle being a lot more resource efficient. So with the amount of land and the amount of feed that you're having to pump into these cattle to really get them to unlock their true genetic potential, we see these cattle being a lot more resource efficient. We see these cattle being able to adapt to many different environments. In my role with the association, I have the chance to travel around to a lot of different ranges all across the United States. Very routinely, I go to places like Florida. So this is going to be very tropical environments, swamps and things like that. These cattle thrive in hot, humid, bug-infested, parasite-infested environments. They're going strong. I go up in the northern parts of the United States where it very routinely gets very cold during the wintertime. That's like minus 20 Fahrenheit, and I don't know if this guy's translating into Celsius or not, but that's very, very cold. That's very, very cold, and we see these cattle thrive there in the cold weather as well. Very routinely go up to parts of like Nevada. So if you don't know what the environment in Nevada, the United States is like, it's very similar to this part of Peru, in Lima. It's high desert, mountains, not very much to eat, and very, very dry. And these cattle are continually excelling in that environment too, on limited forage, limited water, and having to track a long ways in order to get to new food sources, new water sources. They're doing it all. These cattle make excellent mothers, and they make calves that make excellent mothers. This is what we love about this breed. They're thermotolerant, so like I said, they thrive both in heat, hot tropical environments, as well as cold and dry environments. One of the things that we overlook a little bit whenever it comes to commercial producer profitability would be longevity. I can depreciate whether I've bought this cow or this cow has originated on my ranch, she still has a certain amount of cost that comes with it. The longer that this animal is alive and producing on my place, I can depreciate that animal for a much longer period of time, adding to my overall profitability. Some of the global issues that I see, that I saw here in Peru, as well as from what we face in the United States, kind of broke it down into three sections here. Number one being resource scarcity. So we're talking about available land, right? Whether that is tied up in a jungle that you have to go out and clear, or whether that is taken away from urban sprawl, cities growing bigger and bigger, and taking away available farmland. Land is something that we only have one of, and it's not coming back. So available land, access to economical feed ingredients, come to find out is one of the problems that we're facing here in Peru. Access to economical feed ingredients. If you don't have these economical feed ingredients that are very high in energy, it's hard for these cattle to unlock their full genetic potential. Global population growth. Global population growth here. I think the last stat I saw, we're shooting for about 10 billion people on planet Earth in 2050, and we have to feed them all, right? And of course, demand for high-quality protein sources. Beef being the number one source for vitamins like B12 and things like that. Those are really good sources for that. Specifically for the U.S. beef industry, we see things like land scarcity becoming a really big issue for us, right? So cities growing bigger and bigger and bigger. Land being more valuable with a house on it than it is to run cattle on. And so just some of the land that surrounds my family's ranch, what was 6-7 years ago was going for somewhere around $4,000 or $5,000 US per acre. It's now up to $40,000 per acre. So considerable amount of change there as far as amount of available land. From seed stock cattle perspective, we see a lot of our seed stock breeders across the spectrum of breeds making very big investments in terminal traits, right? Winning weight, yearling weight, marbling, things like that, right? Those terminal traits are not necessarily completely antagonistic to maternal traits, but just as anything, if you single trait select for one thing for years and years and years and years, you're bound to give up on something. So we see a lot of these breeders that selected for a very long time for terminal traits, kind of swinging that pendulum back to a certain degree to select for some more of these maternal traits as well. From the commercial cattleman's perspective, we're looking at how heavy our cows are, right? More moderate cows that have a lower body weight, we can run more animal units per the acre, to the acre than those that are heavy. So we're going to look at the weight of the calf that is weaned from each cow, and then creating a percentage of weaned calf weight to body weight of the cow. So if you have a 1,000 pound cow in the same pasture as a 1,300 pound cow, and the 1,300 pound cow weans a 600 pound calf, and the 1,000 pound cow weans a 500 pound calf, yes, there is 100 pounds difference between those, but the lighter weight cow weans 50% of her body weight in terms of that calf, whereas the heavier cow weaned about 42% of her body. So yeah, that calf is heavier, but I could maybe run 2 of those 1,000 pound cows, or I could only run 1 of those 1,300 pound cows, right? So we need to moderate those cow weights a little bit and get that in line there. As far as the U.S. consumer goes, the U.S. consumer by and large is a very quality-driven individual, right? So whenever I say quality-driven, talked to a lot of different people across the industry here in Peru this past week. Seems to be at least a little bit of confusion, or at least a little bit of differentiation as to what the definition of quality is, right? So does quality mean marbling? Does it mean food safety? Does it mean eating experience? Probably means all of them, right? In the U.S. it does mean all of them, but primarily we're looking at eating experience. What are some ways that, and looking at some different ways that we can ensure a positive eating experience for these U.S. consumers? And one of the ways that we do that, and Jessica already touched on this quite a bit, we're going to look at marbling scores, right? So select, choice, high choice, and prime. Prime being the best and select being the worst, right? We're going to use those, and those U.S. consumers are going to buy with their eyes. Whenever we talk about palatability and ensuring a positive eating experience, right? We already touched on this a little bit. Palatability is made up of 3 points right there: tenderness, juiciness, and flavor, with tenderness by far and away driving the bus on that one. Those are what U.S. consumers are really looking for there. All of these are going to be greatly influenced by the amount of marbling that you're going to see in these steaks here. And so the more marbling that we can have, the more that our eating experience is going to be affected there. So need to be selecting for that marbling. But with a over-reliance on just selecting for marbling, what also comes with marbling is an increase in the amount of back fat, right? The total amount of fat on this animal on the exterior. So I think most of us have probably seen this growth curve a few times. But essentially what this means is that as an animal ages, there are certain points that make up this animal: muscle, fat, and bone. And bone relatively is going to stay constant throughout the animal's life. An animal is not going to grow bone as it gets older. But as that animal gets older, we are going to see an increase in muscle until it plateaus and flattens out right about here. This fat curve is going to go up and up and up and up, and marbling is going to eventually plateau right here. One of the problems that we have in the U.S. right now is the feed yards are doing the math on feeding cattle right now, and it pays to leave cattle on feed as long as you possibly can, right, to get the most pounds you possibly can out of those animals. And the hope is that the more feed that you put into them, the more marbling they're going to put on as well, which is partially true. But that marbling curve is going to flatten out right about here as well. And there's no economic signals at all from going to the feeder, coming back from the consumer, coming back from the packer yet, telling them to moderate feeder cattle sizes or carcass weights, right? And this is a problem that's been perpetuated for a really long time. According to the National Beef Quality Audits conducted in the U.S. every 5 years, carcass weights since the mid-1990s, since we tracked this, have continually gone up and up and up and up and up. The problem is with those increasing carcass weights, it's not necessarily an increase in muscle. A lot of times that's an increase in fat, which in turn creates what we call a fat problem, right? So U.S. #1 cut of beef utilized across the industry is ground beef, right? We have to standardize that to a certain fat percentage. 20% fat, 10% fat, 30% fat, what have you. We have a surplus of fat, and we have to import a lot of lean trim from countries like Brazil. So there's a lot of really good opportunity to optimize from our end on red meat yield, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, as well as countries like Peru, countries like Brazil, being able to help satisfy that demand for lean trim for places like the U.S. They're very good at making very fat cattle, but we need some more lean trim. So one of the things that the International Brangus Breeders Association, one of the problems that we submerit, so how good that carcass is, they'd be calling into us and saying, hey, these Brangus calves are more profitable than anything else I'm feeding. Something's up here, right? It's not tracking. So what we did was we came up with what we call the Brangus Value Project. So this is a way for us to benchmark the terminal performance of Brangus-influenced feeder calves, both in the feedlot and on the rail. So what we did is we identified our most high-impact sires in the breed, meaning which bulls had the most calves underneath their names in our herd book, right? We identified those high-impact sires and we bred them to just common commercial cows in Texas and Oklahoma. We purchased, DNA verified all of those steers back to their respective sires, so we knew exactly who they were coming from. Purchased all of the steers, the goods, the bads, and everything in between, and sent them up to a Southwest Kansas feed yard so that we could feed them out. We put them on a grow-safe system to monitor feed efficiency. So what this is here is a feed bunk, like at any feedlot. As the calves put their heads through the gates right here, there is an EID scanner that scans a tag in their ear and will monitor exactly how much feed they eat out of a bunk at a given time. Same setup for the water as well, so we know exactly how much feed they're eating, exactly how much water they're drinking. We can monitor feed efficiency very well with this. We harvested these calves at a large commercial beef packer, one of the largest in the United States, and then removed steaks from each of the loins for tenderness testing. So what we're trying to do is dispel a lot of negative press that we receive from a beef quality perspective and from a tenderness perspective, and I apologize if these numbers are not converted to kilograms, but what we did is we compared our Brangus steers to what we call the Southwest Kansas average. So we're able to take a really good snapshot of every feed yard that is in this specific area of Kansas, where some of the best feeder cattle in the world come from. We're able to look at things like average daily gain, harvest weight, finish weight, and feed to gain conversions, right? Around calves that have entered the feed yard around the same time, around the same weight ours were, so they would have experienced the same environmental challenges, the same everything that our calves did, right? So we're comparing our Brangus calves to a Southwest Kansas benchmark. And some of the big highlights here, our Brangus calves outperform the Southwest Kansas benchmark. From an average daily gain perspective, they gain 3/4 of a pound more every day, on average, than the Southwest Kansas average, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you spread that out across a 180-day feeding period, and that adds up to about 130 or so pounds extra pay weight on those Brangus calves compared to the others. From a feed to gain conversion perspective, our Brangus calves had a 6.2 pounds of feed per pound of live weight gain, which beat the Southwest Kansas average by about 1/3 of a pound of feed per pound of gain. Now, I'm no mathematician, I'm a meat scientist, so I'm not very good with math, but even I can do that math pretty easy. Less feed, more gain, more weight. I like that. From a carcass data perspective, and again, not everybody likes to look at spreadsheets all day like what I do, so I'll summarize this. But from a carcass data perspective, our Brangus calves, their average carcass weight was 940 pounds. So that beat the industry average by about 20 pounds. So more weight on these carcasses. Dressing percentage, I don't know if we've touched on dressing percentage yet, but if you're not familiar with that, essentially what this is the amount of weight that's left on a carcass after you've taken off the hide, the head, the feet, the tail, the intestines, everything. whatever amount of weight that we're left with is our dressing percentage. The average dressing percentage in the United States is about 62%. So our calves beat the industry average in the United States by about 1.7%. And so what that means is our calves had about 30 pounds extra left on the carcass whenever they took off all of the hide, feet, head, everything. Marbling score, if you're not familiar with the U.S. grade system, this probably isn't going to mean much to you, but marbling score, the average Brangus calf in this project, rated average choice. So qualified for premium programs like certified Angus beef, right? So for cattle that traditionally were not always known for being the highest grading in the United States or being able to marble the best, we're up there grading with some of the very best cattle in the industry, right? Yield grade 3.5, again, so a yield grade scale in the U.S. is going to go from 1 to 5. So a 1 is really, really good, less fat, more meat. A 5 is bad, more fat, less meat. We were a yield grade 3.5, so the industry average is 3.5. What's important here is we beat the average carcass weight in the U.S. by about 20 pounds, and that did not come at the expense of leanness. So we put on more muscle, more weight, less fat, right? And again, we sold these cattle on a grid or using formula pricing to the packer. So once they left the feed yard, they left our ownership. The packer paid us based on the merit of the carcasses. So how well they performed. We had no idea how well they were going to perform. We thought we had a pretty good idea, and we earned an extra $55 US per head. Thanks to those grid premiums there, thanks to that increased carcass quality. Now, for a meat scientist like me, this was really impactful here. So, I did tell you that we cut a steak out of each of those loins to send off to a university for tenderness testing, right? So what we're looking at here, each of these columns is a bull's calves and how they performed in terms of their tenderness numbers. The blues are Brangus, the reds are ultra blacks. So these thresholds for tenderness here are set forth by USDA for marketing claims, like certified tender, certified very tender. So we have tender up here, so less tender, more tender down here, right? This far right one over here is an Angus reference sire that we threw in here as well to use for comparative purposes for feed efficiency, for carcass numbers, and for tenderness as well. And what we can see is these Brangus and these ultra calves across the board are very, very similar to what these Angus are. If you're going to drill down into these numbers quite a bit here, the difference of the average tenderness between our Brangus and between this Angus reference sire, which is about 1.76 kilograms of bite force, okay, to bite through a specific sample. So 1.76 kilograms difference. The Angus was slightly, numerically, tender than our Brangus was, but what was impactful here to me is the minimum threshold of detection that the average consumer could tell, so differences between tenderness of two samples, was 4.6 kilograms. So numerically, the Angus was slightly tender than what the Brangus was, but not at a detectable level. So essentially, our Brangus and the Angus samples were essentially the same on tenderness. Some of the committees that we have to address some of the industry issues that we have upcoming here, we call this one the Big Data Subcommittee. So this is basically an attempt for us to accelerate the amount of terminal data that we receive for the Brangus Value Project and things like that. We're going to be looking at DNA verifying just commercial cattle out in the field from one of about the 16,000 bulls that are sold every year, and being able to follow those calves all the way through the feedlot, all the way through the plant, and facilitating that data transfer back to the commercial cattle so that they can make better decisions on their bull buying and their maternal selections as well. The Red Meat Yield Subcommittee, I know I said I was going to talk a little bit more about this. So this is one of the things that the U.S. is facing right now. So a serious need to address some discrepancies in the yield grade equation. So this yield grade equation was developed in the 1960s, using about 150 head of Hereford cattle. So if you know anything about U.S. cattle in the 1960s, they were about this tall, and the average carcass weight was about 600 pounds. Well, that's not the case now, because the average carcass weight is somewhere around 920 pounds, right? We've increased these carcass weights quite dramatically, with no updates on how our people are paid from a yield grade perspective since then. So this red meat yield subcommittee is going to be looking at different ways to evaluate the muscular conformation of our cattle to just make sure that we're staying ahead of the curve here, staying ahead of the industry, and making sure that we continue to create the best cattle that we possibly can. Macy is going to talk a little bit about this here in a minute, but one of the other things that we're going to be working on is a hair shedding EPD. So hair shedding is a really excellent way to monitor the reproductive performance and maternal efficiency. So in hot climates and hot climates, we expect these cattle to slick off and be able to regulate body temperature. Several breeds across the U.S. are having some issues with this. So cattle that do not slick off very fast during the springtime or whenever it gets warm, typically that is an indication that they are not able to regulate body temperature. Even just minor differences in body temperature can greatly impact things like breedback rates and things like that. So we're going to be able to monitor that quite a bit. And the big picture here is we've made a lot of investments in terms of very terminal, high growth cattle, and those cattle are needed to be able to keep pushing this industry forward, right? We need those high end, those high growth cattle to keep pushing us forward, but we're also going to need these maternal cows as well, because those maternal cows are is what keeps us in business. An open cow without a calf is not worth much to anybody, other than just kill price. So the idea for the Brangus breed is that we bring all of this back into balance. From a global implication standpoint, whether or not you have plentiful resources or not from a land perspective or anything, I think we can all come to the agreement that we can all stand to be a little bit more efficient whenever it comes to the resources that we're using, the amount of inputs that we have. Ultimately, the goal is to create more edible product per hectare and being able to supply high-quality protein to those that need it most across the world. Whenever you think about the nutritional needs of developing countries and things, beef, particularly in protein, is really a geopolitical stabilizer, right? So we need to make sure that bellies are full and go from there. And Brangus offers a lot of opportunity to step in and solve a lot of these problems from a red meat yield perspective, from a carcass quality perspective, from an efficiency perspective. Brangus really can be the solution to all of it. And that's all I've got for you. I appreciate the time.
La primera pregunta es, habló de Brangus versus ganado Campo. ¿A qué raza se refiere cuando habló de las Kansas?
So it wasn't really one specific breed. He was talking in my ear in a different language and I didn't understand what was going on. So it wasn't really just one specific breed from Kansas. The most common breed used throughout the United States is Angus, and so it was kind of just assumed that a lot of those cattle were going to be mostly Angus influenced, or Simmental Angus influenced. So it wasn't really one specific breed. We're not able to look into exactly what breeds it was. Kind of point being there is that it was some of the most competitive and highest quality cattle in the world are fed right there in southwest Kansas, and in particular, the singular feedlot that we are feeding these cattle at, High Plains Feeders in Montezuma, Kansas. So the idea that we were able to kind of keep pace with a lot of these cattle in that area, and particularly in that feedlot, was something extremely important.
Para los ganaderos debe ser de preocupación el intento de competencia de producir la carne de laboratorio.
I would say by and large, no. So the question was, are commercial cattlemen worried about lab-grown meat alternatives, alternative meat sources and things like that? I would say by and large, no. In fact, we were just at a conference last week, or 2 weeks ago, where they put up on our screen, showed different demands of protein sources across the U.S., across the world that they did this study on. And by and large, far and away, 43% of these consumers